welcome to the recorded study guide for Unit 8. This unit has two chapters in it, chapters 13 and 14. We're looking at kind of how the nation grows and changes both geographically with like the addition of some states and a lot of territory through some conflicts with other nations, and then also how the nation changes through the way that it thinks and approaches certain topics and subjects, all the way to slavery and women's rights. We start with the first thing on your study guide, which is mountain men, and that can be found on page 419. Mountain men, we would classify them as basically the first people to go west. So if you see something that says, who were the first people to go west, it's the mountain men. These are really rugged people. These are not people that are just going to be able to go out in the west and, set up a tent and live there for a few weeks and then go back. It's not how it works at all. They actually are blazing these trails that are going to become very important for future settlers. But these trails do not exist without the mountain men. So the mountain men are going out there, very difficult, rugged place. I think there's a story in your book on page 419 that gives an example of how mountain men were very rugged, and it talks about Jedediah Smith, and he was a mountain man that is out in the wilderness, and he's just trapping fur because that's what mountain men and these early pioneers do. It's all about getting money. They want to go and trap fur and sell it, and then meet up in the rendezvous points and have that rendezvous system and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, Jedediah Smith is one of these guys. He's out and he's just going through the woods looking for stuff to kill and sell for money. He is attacked by a grizzly bear, and it rips his entire face off. And then he hobbles back to his camp, and there's like a doctor person there, and the guy's like, man, I don't know what to do for you. You're gonna lose your ear for sure. Like, you're gonna look real weird after this too. And Jedediah Smith is like, oh man, you gotta try to at least sew on my ear for me. So the guy does, and then like 10 days later, Jedediah Smith gets up and he goes out some more and tries to find some fur to make some money. So, it's a 10-day turnaround from getting your face ripped off by a grizzly bear. I don't know, that's pretty good. But that shows you how rugged and kind of just extreme that the mountain men had to be in order to survive out there. So with them going out and kind of settling the West and blazing these trails, these different trails start popping up. The first one that we look at is on page 421. It's on the Santa Fe Trail. So the Santa Fe Trail is going to be kind of set up by this guy that named down the next thing on the screen, William Becknell. And this is going to start in Independence, Missouri. Same thing with the Oregon Trail, but we'll get to that later. The Santa Fe Trail goes from Independence to Santa Fe. It's just a trail that he takes through the Rocky Mountains, and he tries to get to Santa Fe. He makes a lot of money, and then that makes other people want to go because he's making a lot of money. He eventually finds this cutoff that goes through the desert instead of going through the mountains, so you can use the wagons and stuff. But yeah, Santa Fe Trail goes from Independence to Santa Fe. The Oregon Trail is this green trail, I believe. Yes, the green trail on this map right here. It again goes from Independence, Missouri, and ends up in the Oregon Territory. You can find a little bit more detailed information on page 422. The Oregon Trail is about 2,000 miles long. It does get set up at first by these missionaries that are going out there, and they start talking about how awesome Oregon is, and that makes everybody go, oh man, I want to go to Oregon. So they do, and in 2-year period, 3,000-4,000 people travel on the Oregon Trail. Not a very good journey, not a very easy one, but a lot of people make it and start filling the Oregon Territory with Americans, even though that at this time we do not control that territory. It's us and Britain that are kind of fighting over it. So up until this point, we've looked at people that are going west just to solely make money. When we look at the Mormon Trail and Brigham Young, we are looking at people that are going west for religious freedom. This is on page 423. So the Mormons and Brigham Young is as their leader through the parts of the Oregon Trail, and then they set up in Salt Lake City. But their main goal here is to escape prejudice in the East and go west and find religious freedom. So everybody up until this point has kind of been all about money and that kind of stuff, but now the Mormons, religious freedom, so that's something important to remember about them. All right, so now that all these people are kind of moving west, we get into conflicts with the countries that are already in control of places in the West. And the first one we look at is the conflict that we're going to have with Mexico. So the area of land that we know today as Texas was originally controlled by originally it was controlled by the Spanish. And this guy named Moses Austin goes and he wants to set up a colony there, and the Spanish say that he can. But the problem is that in 1821, first thing, Moses Austin dies. Second thing, Mexico kicks the Spanish government out, and now that area of Texas is controlled by the Mexicans. So everything that once was Spanish-controlled territory is now the new nation of Mexico. They break away and have their independence. Well, Moses Austin's son, Stephen F. Austin, who's this guy up here looking all awesome with his gun and his sweet hairdo and stuff. So he wants to still set up his colony in Texas, but the problem is he's got to go and ask if it's going to be all right from the Mexican government. The Mexican government agrees that he still can set up a colony. The people that come in have to be Roman Catholic. They have to follow the Texas laws. That's going to be a big issue here in a little bit. But regardless of things that might happen, what does happen is that Stephen F. Austin sets up a very successful colony. A lot of Americans flood into Texas, and pretty soon there's a lot of Americans in Texas, and they start kind of getting a little upset with the Mexican government. The president of Mexico at this time is Santa Anna. That's like what we're going to call him. His full title is General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, which is way too long for me to say a whole bunch. So Santa Anna it is. So he is worried that because there's so many new Texans coming into Texas, these Americans that are coming in there, he's worried that the Texans will eventually revolt and break away and start a big fight. So he sends a lot of troops up there. Okay, well, his fears are definitely valid because the Texans are extremely angry. They do not like the Mexican government. A few things that they don't like, or the reasons that kind of the Mexican Revolution or the Texas Revolution happens. They don't like the laws. They don't like that everything's in Spanish, and they don't like that they ban slavery. So these three things are kind of very key into why the Texas Revolution happens. This kind of is all outlined on page 429, and what happens is Santa Anna knows that the Texans are very angry about those three things. He sends a lot of troops up there to kind of control everybody. Stephen F. Austin sees that this is going to turn into a big fight. So he tries to go to Santa Anna and say, hey, can we just work some stuff out? Santa Anna's like, oh, I guess so, whatever. But until he finds this letter that Stephen F. Austin writes that says, guys back in Texas, that's who he's writing this letter to. I'm here talking to Santa Anna, and everything's going great, but if he doesn't give me what I want, I think that we should have a big war and break away and kill a whole bunch of Mexicans. So that makes Santa Anna, he finds his letter, and he makes Santa Anna very angry, and he puts Austin in jail, and that makes the Texans really angry, and then the Texas Revolution starts. So they start fighting back and forth, Texas trying to break away from Mexico. The Texans have a very small army. One of the places that they kind of try to set up fort or camp or whatever is the Alamo. This whole Battle of Alamo can be found on page 430. So the Texans are defending this Spanish mission right here in San Antonio, and they defend it for 13 days. They are incredibly outnumbered. They fight very valiantly for 13 days, and eventually on the 13th day, Santa Anna sends about 2,000 Mexican troops into the building itself just to storm the building and, force all the Texans to surrender and kill them or whatever. So what ends up happening is they go in, they show no mercy, and they actually end up killing everyone, even the people that surrender. This makes the Texans furious. People in Texas hear about this, and they become furious, and they decide, well, now is the time for us to really rise up and fight against the Mexican government. We are going to join in the fight. And as the Texas Army is retreating from the Alamo east, they actually double in size because all of these people saying, hey, we have to fight for these people that died at the Alamo. We have to fight for in their memory. We have to remember the Alamo. Get it? Because that's what they say, remember the Alamo. Yeah. So the battle that they say this and they yell it, they're like, remember the Alamo. Probably a little bit more energetic than that, but you get it. Sure. So that battle that they do that is the Battle of San Jacinto, which is right here. It's not on your study guide. It's just the battle that kind of ends the whole Texas Revolution. Santa Anna is forced to sign a peace treaty, and now Texas is its own independent thing. It's its own little republic, and what the nickname of it, because of the Battle of the Alamo, because of the San Jacinto battle, Texas wins. They become their own little republic. They are called the Lone Star Republic. That's their nickname. Their flag, it's got the 1 star on it. Actually, you can see it up here in this picture of the Alamo. 1 star. Oh, great. Okay, so that's the story of how Texas breaks away from Mexico. They are now separate from Mexico, and they want to become part of the United States. The United States Congress actually at first says, we're not really sure, because we don't really want to get Mexico really angry at us. We also don't want to upset the slave and free state balance, so maybe we'll just hold off on this. But over time, what's going to introduce itself is this idea of manifest destiny, which is the next thing on your study guide. It's on page 433. The thing with manifest destiny is that, it's this belief that the United States should own all of the land basically that you see on this map. So basically from coast to coast, from sea to shining sea. And they don't really care. Some people don't really care who's in their way when they want to get this land. I mean, they can't have it right now. Other countries control it, namely Mexico and Britain. James K. Polk is going to be elected president during this time. This is on page 434. His whole big thing is that he wants to expand the country, and his big slogan is 54th or fight, which means it has to do with the Oregon Territory and expanding to the 54th parallel. He's saying that if we don't get all that land, we're going to go to war with Britain, and it's going to be a big deal, and we're going to fight, and it's going to be a war. And yeah, well, none of that happens because he settles for half of it. And so that whole slogan that's nice and catchy doesn't really do anything because he's like, 54th, or we'll settle for the 49th because we don't want to fight you. Not really a very good slogan. So he went with the 54th or fight because that's shorter. Didn't really want to go with the 54th or 49th, whatever you feel like giving us. It's up to you because we don't want to fight you, whatever. The reason that he has to settle for half of it is because he's got bigger issues with Mexico, because eventually what's going to happen is we're going to decide, hey, we want Texas to be a part of the United States. Well, the problem with that is it's that Mexico sees this as an act of war. So the Oregon Territory, we settle for half of it because we don't want to deal with Britain and Mexico at the same time. But eventually we have to deal with Mexico because we annex Texas, which means that we include Texas into the United States. This is on page 434. Mexico sees this as an act of war because, in their opinion, we are taking land that belongs to them, and they don't like that very much. So what ends up happening is, at first, James K. Polk, the president, remember, he wants to actually buy all of this land up here. If we look at this map, all of this stuff right here, basically, for like $30 million. Well, Texas says no, because that'd be like half of their country, and they don't want to give up all of that land. So James K. Polk says, all right, fine, we'll just fight you for it. So he sends General Kearny through the top part of this Mexico territory, and his job is to capture all this, which he does really easily. He actually gets to California, and there are some Californians that are doing very similar things to what the people in Texas were doing. People in Texas didn't like the Spanish, didn't like the Mexican laws. They didn't like that everything was in Spanish. They didn't like that they banned slavery. The people in California don't like the Mexican laws either, and they decide that they're going to break away just like they did in Texas. And they become the Republic of California. And this whole episode where they actually do break away is called the Bear Flag Revolt, because they had a flag that had a bear on it, and they revolted. Get it? Bear Flag Revolt. So the state flag today of California has a bear on it, so hopefully you can kind of remember that when California first formed, they had a Bear Flag Revolt, and they still have a bear on their flag. So anyway, with the help of the people in California, General Kearny and the Americans control the northern part of Mexico pretty easily, and then they storm down through the southern part. Zachary Taylor and people, other American generals, go in, and they actually are able to capture places near Buena Vista. Then they also capture Mexico City, and they force the Mexican government to surrender, and the Americans have won the war with Mexico. Remember, we are doing this because we want this land, and it's all driven by this manifest destiny. So we are in control of Mexico now, and now we sign a peace treaty to end the war, and that is the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which is the next thing on your study guide, and it is on page 437. Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo outlines a few things. We get a vast amount of land from this treaty. Mexico has to recognize that Texas is part of the United States. It gives us all of this red area, which is called the Mexican Secession. That is on page 437 as well. It gives us states like Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada. California is a big one that we get. So now, basically, what is played out here is that we have all of the Oregon Territory up here. We have all of this red area. We have all of Texas. We already had the Louisiana Purchase. And then we buy this Gadsden Purchase right here for $10 million. So now what we have is the land that we wanted in Manifest Destiny. We have all the land from coast to coast, from sea to shining sea. So Manifest Destiny is fulfilled through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo and the purchase of the Gadsden Purchase. And now, really, we just have to see what happens once once everybody starts moving out into this new area. And the first area that we look at where these people are going to flood to is California, with the California Gold Rush. The California Gold Rush begins when this guy named James Marshall, who is on your study guide here, James Marshall, 439, finds gold in the American River, and that starts just a crazy amount of movement to California. Thousands of people flood into California looking for gold, hoping to strike it rich. There are already people living in California. The Californios are one group. The Native Americans are also living there as well. The Californios and Native Americans are not going to experience very good things during the California Gold Rush. Just for example, the Californios basically lose all of their rights. They lose their land. Native Americans, their land is polluted and changed, and their way of life is changed. They also, are killed, and just because people want their land. One guy here is Mariano Varalho, if you remember him. He's got the sideburns and stuff, yeah. So Mariano Varalho, he has, at the beginning of the Gold Rush, has 250,000 acres. That's a lot of land, in case you didn't know. 250,000 acres is a really large chunk of land. At the end of the Gold Rush, however, he is only left with 300 of those acres. So this kind of illustrates some of those effects of the Gold Rush because, thousands pour into California. Native Americans lose their lives, their land. Californios lose their lives, their land, their legal rights. And it's just not a lot of good things going on for people. The other effects of the California Gold Rush, however, thousands pour into California, like I had said. That gives it enough people in it to become a state. And, though this all happens in 1849, so those 49ers are flooding in to California, and they are able to become a state. It becomes a free state. It does upset the balance in Congress because it does become a free state. So those are some of the effects of the Gold Rush. You can look at some of those things on page 443. Now, as our country becomes kind of more set in its boundaries and the way, that's how we change geographically and how we change the size of our country. Now we look at how we change in the type of people that are living here. And this is going to lead to a very large increase in immigration. This chart right here is in your book. It is on page 452. It outlines what are push and pull factors of immigration. Push factors are things that push people out of a country. Pull factors are things that pull people or attract people to another country. So push factors could be overcrowding, could be famine. One of the big push factors that we look at has to do with the Irish, and the Irish potato famine is on page 453. And the Irish potato famine is a very large push factor. Millions are forced to leave Ireland and come to the United States. And pull factors, these people are coming to the United States because of, religious freedom of any kind. There's abundant land and an economic opportunity to maybe make some money and start a new life. With this increase and explosion in the number of people that are coming into the country, attitudes and beliefs and just thoughts are changed a little bit. The Second Great Awakening happens. This is on page 459. The Second Great Awakening is a religious movement that kind of shifts people's thinking from, only a select group of people are saved and go to heaven or whatever, to more of an idea that everyone has the opportunity. Everyone has an equal opportunity to do so. So the Second Great Awakening is very much rooted in equality and everybody having a fair shot at things, and that bleeds over into other aspects of life. One of those is education and schooling. Horace Mann is on your study guide. He is right here, and he has to do with education and education reform. This all is kind of outlined and talked about on page 460, but this is a direct result of the Second Great Awakening and this movement of religion and spreading equality to everyone and everyone having a fair shot, because Horace Mann is a big proponent of opening more public schools so more people can get an education, learn how to read. Then we also see an increase in schools for the deaf and for the blind. We also see other reform movements when it comes to mental hospitals, prisons, and that, it's all about helping those less fortunate gain the same opportunities that everyone else has. Well, this thought process leads to another reform movement that's called abolition. Abolition is the movement to end slavery. This is on page 465. An abolitionist is somebody that wants to end slavery. A lot of people were abolitionists, mainly people in the North were abolitionists. People in the South obviously supported slavery more. Some abolitionists were former slaves, and they would help out by doing a few different things. These two people up here, Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, they were both public speakers. They went around and talked about how horrible their experiences with slavery were, and they talked about why slavery needed to be outlawed. And so that's how some former slaves helped the abolition movement. Other former slaves helped the abolition movement by actually removing slaves from the South and taking them to the North. And that brings us to the next thing on your study guide, which is on page 467. It is the Underground Railroad. Once again, just to be perfectly clear, the Underground Railroad is neither underground nor is it a railroad. So you need to be aware that it's just a name, and it doesn't actually mean that it's underground, and it doesn't actually mean that it's a railroad. What it actually is a series of escape routes from the South to the free North, and people would lead the slaves on these escape routes. They would stop at these houses that were safe for them to stay in, called stations. The people that were leading them through this escape route would be called conductors. The most famous conductor is someone that you've probably heard of before. It is Harriet Tubman. It's also on page 467. She actually makes 19 trips back and forth to help slaves get their freedom, and she becomes very famous for that. So these abolitionists are helping slaves. Some of these abolitionists are actually women, and they start looking around and realizing, hey, we are helping these slaves gain rights, or trying to help them gain rights that we as women don't actually have. Because at this time, when a woman would not have the right to vote, speak publicly, sometimes control her own property and money, and basically they were treated like children. So these abolitionists, these women abolitionists that were fighting for slaves' rights, they start to realize, hey, we don't have these rights either. Maybe we should fight for our own rights. And one of these people is Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who's down here on your study guide. She's the last thing. It's 468. She actually helps establish and set up the Seneca Falls Convention, which is on page 469. And what the Seneca Falls Convention is Elizabeth Cady Stanton helped set that up, and it's basically the first convention on women's rights. They get together, they sit down, and they start talking about all the things, why women should have these rights, what rights they should have, why it's bad for them not to have these rights. And they write all this down in a document called the Declaration of Sentiments and Resolutions, and they start gaining a little bit of support. It does not become fully understood that women should have these equal rights, but it does at least start getting a little bit of momentum. So that's kind of everything on your study guide. There's a good amount of stuff here to look over. We will go from this to the B-level questions right now. As usual, we have talked about a vast majority of these B-level questions already through, the study guide already. So, what motivated early pioneers to journey into the rugged West? Obviously, you just need to focus on explaining who these people were, what they did, and then why they did it. So, they're out there. They're the mountain men. They're setting up their rendezvous system. They are doing those different things. And then the reason that they're doing this is because they want to make money. So a good answer would include kind of all of those things. How did American settlers cause problems in Texas? Might want to set up the backstory of why people were in Texas to begin with, Stephen F. Austin, that kind of stuff. And then talk about how they didn't like Mexican laws. They didn't like everything that was written in Spanish. They didn't like that the Mexican government banned slavery, and then they decided that they wanted to rebel, and that's how the Texas Revolution started. How does a belief in manifest destiny lead to friction with other countries? Well, explain what manifest destiny is. Explain that we wanted all of the land from coast to coast, but the problem was that land was already controlled by other countries. So obviously, if we want it, it's going to cause us to have a little bit of problems with other countries. Then give examples, like Oregon with the British and Mexico with all of that land out in the West. Explain the events that led to the war with Mexico. We annexed Texas. We offer them money for all of the land that we want, and they say no. And obviously going into a lot more detail than that, but that's basically what happens. Explain what events led to the fast settlement of California. Explain the beginnings of the California Gold Rush. James Marshall, American River. Why people went there, what they were looking for. Explain what attracted immigrants to America in the mid-1800s. Those are, you're basically just looking at pull factors. Abundant land, freedom, economic opportunity. You can also explain what is pushing people out of their old country as well. How did religion and philosophy encourage people to improve society? We just talked about this when we looked at the Second Great Awakening, how it shifted things more to, everybody should have an equal shot at things, and that kind of bleeds over into reform movements like education, blind, deaf schools, prison reform, mental hospitals, How did the labor movement try to improve working conditions? Basically, that's also in that same area as the Second Great Awakening, and just talk about strikes and unions and stuff. What methods did abolitionists use to fight against slavery? They had pamphlets. They encouraged slaves to revolt, and then also former slaves helped as well. They had the Sojourner Truth and Frederick Douglass. They were public speakers, and Underground Railroad with Harriet Tubman. How did the fight for abolition lead to women's rights? We talked about that as well. These women are realizing that they are fighting for rights for slaves, and they actually don't even have those rights themselves. So they decide that they want to start fighting for their own rights. So those are the B-level questions. That's pretty much everything that will be on your test. you need to watch this video again. I would suggest that. Read over your study guide, read over your notes. If you do have questions, you can put those on Twitter or Facebook, and we'll get to those. So yeah, just study a little bit more, and good luck.